So unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have seen what's been going on with Eni Aluko, and potentially, depending on where you get your information, you'll also have seen what's been happening with Rupert Lowe since he launched Restore Britain as a political party. I find these two case studies fascinating when it comes to understanding the current media landscape. And one of the really interesting components about this is how it's going to impact Rupert later on down the line when it comes to the mainstream media. So what am I talking about? What I'm talking about is our traditional, contemporary, old order, what we call legacy media, mainstream media, gatekeeper system versus the new independent media system. Why Eni Aluko? Eni Aluko is an interesting example because she depends heavily on these people, the media gatekeepers, for her exposure. And there's a few reasons for that. So she's chosen the route of contemporary pundit. Why do I say contemporary pundit? Well, the great thing about the internet is if you're interested in a subject, or even if you're not interested in a subject, but you find a person interesting, you can get commentary on a topic, sport, politics, from wherever you like. Which means that if you're particularly good at your craft, if you're good in front of the camera, if people listen to you, you clearly and obviously don't need, in this country, a BBC or a Sky News or an ITV. Now, a good example of this, for me, from my perspective, there's a YouTuber, a creator called Rocket-Powered Mohawk. If you've not seen any of his stuff, and listen, if you get offended easily, don't watch any of his stuff because you'll barely make it through 10 minutes. He commentates on F1. I went through a phase a couple of years ago, 2021-ish to 2023-ish, where I watched a couple of seasons of Drive to Survive, the Netflix behind-the-scenes documentary on the F1 scene, and loved it, but got bored quite quickly. But the good thing is it taught me enough to know enough about what's going on. Why am I going off on this tangent? Rocket Power Mohawk would never in a million years get booked by any of the contemporary legacy media channels. He would never get booked by Sky, he would never get booked by Channel 4, never. Because he's just so outrageous. But his following on social media is huge. I'm that much of a fan of his that I subscribe to his Patreon. I pay him like £4.50 a month so that I can watch content that's not available on YouTube or anywhere else. I'm just going to check how many Patreon members he has. Right, Rocket Powered Mohawk, the F1 commentator that you've probably never heard of, that will not ever get a looking by any of the mainstream media gatekeepers, has 44,700 members on Patreon that pay roughly £4.50 a month. He earns £201,150 per month just from Patreon. That's excluding YouTube. What's the point I'm making here? Well, here's the relationship between RPM and whether he is doing something right or not. One signal is required, the money. It's as simple as that. Why do people pay him, including myself, why do people pay him money per month? Because they love his content. And he's worth paying for me and for 44,000 other people. He's worth paying that money for. So in this independent media space here, he's active on YouTube and he's active on Patreon. And that single metric of number of subscribers and how many of those subscribers he converts into a monetary figure is all the proof you need that you're doing the right thing. And the right thing is that you continue to gain subscribers. Eni Aluko would have no shot at this game, the independent media game, if she went all in on independent media. She knows this. She's not popular enough. She's not likable enough. So she is entirely dependent on these three mean-looking guys here. They are the gatekeepers. They are dependent on the anointment of these gatekeepers. And for a century plus, this was the only way. This was the only way. Some people are still living in that world. Eni Aluko and the like are part of that world. I don't watch live football other than when it's England men's. But if I did, I'm sure I would find out there, and I'm sure you watching will know of YouTube commentators that commentate on a particular team or teams that will never be on a part of the mainstream media. But I believe this is the crux of Eni Aluko's issue, is she is 100% dependent on the old order. She's 100% dependent on how things used to be. She's still living in that world. She has to live in that world. She needs the permission of the mainstream media, because if she has to go into this world, a world where everybody starts on zero, it's completely egalitarian. Look at all these individual creators here, all starting on 0 subscribers, 0 views, but they've got an equal shot at the cherry, the cake, whatever. This guy here has managed to earn himself. It hasn't been granted to him. He hasn't been anointed by the mainstream media. We don't need your anointment, thanks. This guy's gained a massive following. This is rocket-powered Mohawk in my example. It doesn't need permission. He doesn't need the permission of these guys. It's permissionless. His direct audience approval, this person's direct audience approval, rocket-powered Mohawk's direct audience approval, is direct revenue. Now, Rupert Lowe. How does Rupert Lowe fit into this? Rupert Lowe has not been anointed by the mainstream media. The gatekeepers aren't letting him in. As it stands now, his Restore Britain post on X has been viewed 30 million times. But I bet when I start editing this, because I won't edit this today, it will have gone up probably quite considerably between now and then. So whatever the figure is on the screen now is what the figure is when I was editing. When I shared the post with my parents in yesterday morning, it was at 4 million, and I thought, flipping heck, that's a result. It would have been a result. Barely a peep from the mainstream media. But that's okay, because Rupert has massively leveraged independent media. For lots of you watching, this is going to be like, okay, yeah, we know this. This is not new stuff. We're not learning anything here. But here's the interesting thing about this country. These guys are going to have no choice but to open the gates for Rupert, because now he's a political party. What does that mean? What that means is that the mainstream media can snub him as much as they like. The BBCs, the ITVs, the Skies, they can snub him all day, every day. And he can continue to build his social media strength as he has done, and that's what he leans on, and that's what he depends on. He's not fragile to their opinion. He's actually anti-fragile, which is a term coined by Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb's philosophy underpins much of my everyday thinking. If you've not read him, I suggest you read him. But here's the crux of it, folks. The mainstream media have a legal obligation to platform Rupert as soon as Restore Britain start polling significantly. Ofcom rules state that due weight and due impartiality must be given to political parties. And so when the polling rises, the broadcast coverage will become mandatory. So these guys will have to let him in, even though he won't have been anointed by them. They're going to have to step aside. The BBCs, the Sky News, the ITVs, they're going to have to step aside and let him in the old media castle, the mainstream media castle. And so then Rupert is in a position where he has both sides. All I can say, folks, is buckle up, because it's going to get very interesting.